Do you need a firm understanding of music theory to be a great guitar player? I asked you guys on Instagram, and according to this poll, 70% of you said no. That was well over 1,000 people said no, you don't need a good grasp of music theory to be a great guitar player. And I agree with them. Playing guitar is music, and music is art, and art is subjective, and there are no rules for art. There is no right or wrong way to do something when you are creating an idea or creating a piece of art. There is no right or wrong. So technically, do you need to have a firm grasp of music theory and harmony to be a great guitar player? No, but I think it really helps. But I don't think there's a direct correlation between your amount of knowledge when it comes to theory and your skill and talent as a guitar player. But if you look at most truly great guitar players, I'm talking about our heroes, the people that we look up to from the past and the present, I would say that most of them have had a really firm grasp of musical theory and harmony and how they apply that to their style and their sound. So in today's video, I want to explore this question a little bit further. Do you really need music theory to be a great guitar player? And I'm also going to share with you my one concept that I think every guitar player should know, no matter your style or your pursuit or your level. I think this is one concept, a theory concept that everyone should know. Before we go any further, I think we need to define what music theory actually is. People always talk about music being the universal language, and I actually think, as cliche as that sounds, it is somewhat true. Music functions like a language. It's a way of communicating ideas through a medium. Just like speaking a language, we are communicating ideas through the medium of speech and sentence structure and vocabulary. Making music is very similar in that you are communicating an idea through a combination of rhythm and pitch and harmony, bringing those elements together to create music. Music theory simply is a way to communicate these ideas with other musicians. It's a way to ascribe concepts and names to a lot of these ideas and common practices in music making as a way to communicate them and to pass these ideas down to other musicians. I like to think of it in the same way as a novelist or a writer. A good writer needs to have a story to tell, first and foremost. But a firm grasp of grammar and vocabulary can help them tell that story in a unique and compelling way. Understanding the language that they're trying to share this story in and the way it works and how to convey emotion or suspense or humor helps them to tell the great story. But just having a firm grasp and a deep knowledge and understanding of things like vocabulary and grammar and sentence structure and all the things that physically make up a language doesn't actually make you a great storyteller. In the same way that having a PhD in music theory or master's in jazz studies, that doesn't make you a great musician, a great jazz musician, or a great writer or composer or producer. You have to have something to say. You have to have a story to tell. So in my opinion, that's the best way to look at music theory. It's just a way of communicating musical concepts and ideas so that you can understand them better and apply them to your own playing. It's not something to be studied and accumulated for its own sake. It's not something that you want to master for the sake of just knowing a bunch of concepts. It's a tool, and it's a way of learning new techniques and ways to implement your ideas and convey your ideas in your own music. And I think that's how a lot of our guitar heroes see music theory. It's just a means to an end. Now, I think there's countless examples of this, of guitar players who I think embody this idea. But I'm going to point out Julian Lodge because I've actually been listening to him a lot recently and have been really inspired by his playing and his feel and his touch. When you watch someone like Julian play, you can see that there is a deep understanding of the guitar. It's almost like there's a direct path between his mind and what he wants to say and his hands. It's almost instantaneous. It's like he's not even thinking about how to play something. He just thinks up an idea and it comes out. I think this is a great example of what a strong understanding of musical theory and harmony combined with a great musical sensibility and great taste can do. Now, it's not just reserved for jazz guitarists. I mean, there are hundreds of examples of amazing guitar players across all genres of music that exemplify this. I just picked Julian because I really love his playing and his tone, and I'm kind of nerding out on him at the moment. But there's another thing that's happening with players like that I think is important to consider whenever we're talking about the music theory question. It's not theory alone that made a player like him so great. It's the study of theory and harmony combined with listening and taking inspiration from other musicians, not just other guitar players, but other musicians across the board that have informed his influences and his tastes along the way. Years and years of listening and trying to learn what he was hearing and learn what others were playing, combined with an understanding of what was actually happening, what was going on in the music that he loved, helped him to develop this unique sound. And to me, I think that is the best reason of all to want to understand at least the basics of music theory as a guitar player. When you're listening to your influences, when you're listening to your favorite players and you're trying to learn what they did, what is it about their playing that you love so much and that inspires you so much? If you understand what they were actually doing, the mechanics behind their choices that they made, it's going to help you understand and internalize that playing so you can make it your own thing. It's the best way to learn, in my opinion. So, where do you start? If you're a guitar player who has no knowledge of any kind of musical theory whatsoever, whether you're a complete beginner or you've been playing for years, where do you start? I think there's one overarching theme that pretty much every guitar player should have a firm understanding of when it comes to theory, and that is understanding the fretboard. What I mean by that is you need to understand how this works. I think this is so important that I'm actually working on a video course right now dedicated to expanding on all of this stuff. I think one of the first things to understand is notes on the fretboard. Just learn your fretboard. I would start with 4 fret cells. Learn the notes in the first position, so from the 1st fret through the 4th fret, and work on that until you have a firm understanding. So for instance, knowing that in this position I have a few different places that I could play this F note. Once you've started to learn your notes up and down the fretboard, the next thing is intervals. Find major thirds, perfect fifths, octaves, major sevenths, flat sevenths. And not just memorizing the shapes and where they are on the fretboard, but listening to them. You want to be able to hear this and instantly know that's a perfect 4th. And then the third thing to really understand are your triads and chord shapes. Triads, I think, are the most important thing to start off with. A triad is just a 3-note chord, a major triad being a root, 3rd, and 5th. Any combination of these 3 notes, the root note, the 3rd, and the 5th note, is going to give you a major triad in that key. So for instance, here is C. If you can combine those 3 things, notes on the fretboards, intervals, and triads, that gives you a really great foundation to build on when you're learning stuff later down the road. For instance, I can take an E major chord like this, and just by moving a few notes around, get something like this. Or this. That comes from a basic understanding of simple triads and where your notes are on the fretboard. Once you have a firm grasp of that stuff, you can start to build on top of it. And when you're starting to learn and transcribe your favorite songs or solos, if you know your notes and you know your intervals and you know your basic chord shapes, you can then start to actually understand and internalize what your favorite players were doing when they came up with that part that you were learning. Now, I think a lot of guitar players out there, myself included, have a bit of a complicated relationship with music theory. I tend to think of it like a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have someone who knows absolutely no music theory and has pretty much an aversion to it, doesn't want anything to do with any kind of theory, knowledge, or study whatsoever. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, you have someone who's a bit obsessive with music theory. It seems to be that's all they're interested in, and the only reason they pick up their guitar is in the further pursuit of gaining more music theory and harmony knowledge. Now, throughout my time as a guitar player, I've been on multiple places in that spectrum, and it sort of is like a pendulum. It swings back and forth, starting with about 10 years ago when I was in music school. I went to a school here in Atlanta called Atlanta Institute of Music and Media, and up until that point, I had zero instruction as a guitar player. I was completely self-taught for the first 6 years of my time playing the instrument. And it wasn't until I went to music school that I started to learn things like the major scale and the harmonized major scale and the major modes and all of the basics of music theory and harmony. And for a year, all I did was eat, sleep, and breathe guitar. I learned my modes. I learned jazz studies. I learned how to read music and sight read music, although admittedly I was unbelievably bad at reading. And during that year, I began to think that in order to be a great guitar player, you had to have a deep understanding of theory. You had to gain and retain a lot of knowledge when it came to music theory. You had to memorize these scale shapes and these modes and these jazz harmonies and how to play over 2-5-1 turnarounds and all that stuff in order to be a great guitar player. And it got to the point where it really hurt my playing. When I got out of music school, I was so caught up in that way of thinking, that complexity equaled quality, that it took me about a year to a year and a half of gigging out and playing before I realized that actually that's not the case. I felt that I had to use all of this knowledge and these concepts that I had gained when I was at music school, and if I wasn't using them, then I wasn't playing well, that I didn't sound good unless I played the most complex thing that I knew how to play. And it took me a few years to get over that. And so that pendulum started to swing back the other way to the point where I basically had an aversion to any complex harmony or musical theory concepts whatsoever. I wasn't interested in it. I didn't want to practice. I didn't want to learn any of that stuff. I was into playing the most simple and accessible guitar sounds and guitar concepts out there. And I lived in that space for a few years. And now I'm getting to the point where that pendulum is starting to swing back to the middle. My ear is hearing things and I want to start playing things that I can't quite pull off on my instrument. And so for me, that means that I'm hiring a guitar teacher. I'm signing up for lessons again. I'm going to start taking weekly lessons. Now that'll be a video on its own that'll come out in the very near future. But I'm getting to the place where I kind of have a somewhat healthy relationship with music theory again. It took me almost a decade to get here, but I'm finally here. I'm ready to start taking this stuff on again. But in my opinion, the thing that's important to remember here is it's not what you know, it's how you use it. Do you need to have a really deep understanding of music theory to be a great guitar player? Absolutely not. There have been plenty of great guitar players out there, iconic guitar players, who really didn't understand what they were playing. They just heard it and they felt it and they knew how to get it out of their instrument. And that's really all you need. But there are a ton of benefits to having an understanding of the inner workings and the infrastructure behind music and musical concepts, and that's where theory comes in. It's strictly a way to communicate. It's strictly a way to help you understand a lot of common ideas and methods and concepts that we as guitar players use all the time. Now, you may completely disagree with me, and if you do, let me know down in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Also, be sure to check out the links in the description box down below as well. You can sign up for the green room down there. You can also buy my tone course down there as well. You can also see some of the gear that I use to make these videos. Those are affiliate links, so if you buy something through that link, I make a small commission, which really helps me out in running this channel. Don't forget our next Backstage live show is happening September 12th, 2020. I think we're going to be dropping our first single as the band. We're finally getting ready to put out some original music, so you're going to want to catch that live. September 12th, 2020, that's a Saturday. If you're not subscribed, be sure to subscribe here down below. Also follow me on Instagram at Rhett Shull. That's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Rhett Shull, and remember, there is no plan B.